the dark. Finally, I can see you crystal clear. Go ahead and sell me out and I'll lay your ship bare. See, I'll leave with every piece of you. Don't underestimate the things that I will do. There's a fire starting in my heart, reaching a fever pitch and it's bringing me out the dark. The scars of your love remind me of us. They keep me thinking that we almost had it all. The scars of your love, they leave me breathless. I can't help feeling we could have had it all. Rolling in the deep. You have my heart inside of your hand, and you played it to the beat. Baby, I have no story to be told, but I've heard one on you, and I'm gonna make your head burn. Think of me in the depths of your despair. Make a home down there is my
Hey, good evening, everyone. It's John with the Missouri Liberty Report. We're going to if I could speak this evening, we're going to kick things off momentarily with Mr. Maat, who is running for the presidential nomination out of the Libertarian Party. But before we get into the Freedom Talk, let's start the recording.
In the restaurant of life, we're putting freedom back on the menu. It's the Missouri Liberty Report with John Williams, working with grassroots organizations and legislatures to make Missouri the freest state in the nation. Let freedom ring.
All right, folks, and we're back with another edition of the Missouri Liberty Report. Very, very happy and excited to be joined by Libertarian Presidential candidate, looking for the nomination for the Libertarian Party, Mr. Maat. And you can literally go to MikeTermott.com to check out all of his background, his bio, and a lot of the issues that he finds important and some of the things that he would like to do. But without further ado, Mr. Termott, good evening to you and welcome to the show.
Thank you, John. It's a great joy to be with you. I feel like I'm almost in Missouri right now, which is a good place to be and a good feeling to have.
Well, yeah, today's a lot warmer. It's been miserable the first few days of the week, but today's much more comfortable outside, and you can actually go outside and enjoy yourself. I guess to start off the show, give us a little of your background, and then we'll just head right into some of the really, I guess, heated topics in today's news and across the country here.
Sure, I appreciate that, and I'll pick up the pace. I'm pretty sure going through my bio and resume is going to be the worst 2 minutes of anyone's day in your audience. Look, I grew up as a bit of a Republican. I grew up in commercial finance. I worked for banks when I got out of business school and got out of engineering school. I went back to graduate school at the George Washington University to study economics, where I got a couple of more degrees. GW is and was a very pro-market program, and so that put me in good stead. I worked as an economist for the White House for a couple of years, for a couple of other public agencies. I spent almost a decade after that as a professional advocate in Washington for freer markets, greater competition, less regulation, especially in the financial services space. I spent almost a decade having launched my own business in the space of providing strategic consulting to financial institutions and nonprofits and providing executive education to a lot of bankers and financial services executives. I've taught economics at 3 different universities. And as a second career, John, I worked as a police officer from the age of 49 to 60, which is to say, until just a couple of years ago. I was on the road for about 11 and a half years in Broward County in South Florida, all as a registered libertarian. So as you might imagine, that was a fascinating experience, a great experience for me personally, one that does lead to a certain number of discussions and sometimes arguments, but such is the stuff of life, no?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, being in law enforcement and being a libertarian has to have you feeling a little torn at times. You know, when you talk about the drug war, victimless offenses, things like that, that's really got to kind of split you down the middle. You want to do a good job. You want to, defend the Constitution as your oath demands. But then you see things in your line of work and you're like, how do I handle these things? That's got to be a little nerve-wracking, I would assume.
That does happen from time to time. I was very lucky. I was able to find a great agency that was large enough that we had a separate traffic unit, for example. I didn't have to get involved with the dopey quota system of trying to raise money for the town. We had a separate vice unit, so I didn't really have to get involved with the dopiness of the war on drugs. I didn't have to get involved with, the vice stings and the prostitution stings and the asset forfeiture crap. All that makes our heads explode as libertarians. Nonetheless, you do discover as a police officer relatively quickly that there is a difference between good police work and bad police work. And part of that is that you learn that you are the first and last offense of the Constitution in many cases. Police officers have an enormous amount of discretion, much more than I had anticipated, an enormous amount of discretion over how any particular case can go. And so it is really up to you. You put your finger right on it to honor the Constitution. And of course, we know, and officers know this, and officers will tell you this, the job, viewed correct, done right? The job is to protect life, to protect property, to protect your rights. That's what it's all about. And so I'm a big believer not only in public service in general, but I'm a big believer that libertarians need to get more involved with public service in general, yes, but in law enforcement in particular.
Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree with that. This doesn't go just for libertarians. This goes for a lot of different political parties, that you have a lot of backseat drivers and, what do they call them, armchair quarterbacks. There's no real involvement, but boy, they'll sure tell you when you're not being a real whatever party that you belong to. And so, yeah, there's a lot of armchair quarterbacking, and those who choose to get out and do good deeds, we need more examples of that for sure. I mean, go ahead.
Yeah, at least to try to fight your way through it, right? At least engage in the battle, at least try to push these institutions and these cultures in the right direction. It's not easy, of course, but to your point about armchair quarterbacking, it's a great phrase in this context. I don't have a lot of patience for folks on either side of the political divide in the duopolistic political system that we have. For, on the one side, you hear a lot of back the blue in every case, right? And that is something that even police officers don't say. Even I wouldn't say something that dumb. As a cop, right? Mistakes are made when they're, best intentions notwithstanding. And you also know that there are people that shouldn't be cops who are. And I don't have a lot of patience on the other side either. I don't have a lot of patience for example, defund the police. I think defund the police is a way to hold up your hand and basically say, reform is hard and it's too hard for me. I don't understand it. I don't get it. I don't want to put in the hard work. I don't understand either the culture of police work or the values of my underlying community, because polling data show, and anecdotally, you'll learn if you ever campaign for local office, people don't want to get rid of their police. They want to get rid of bad policing. They want good policing, and they want policing that better aligns with their values, with their principles. They want their politicians to force this to happen, but typically politicians suck at it.
No, you're absolutely right. It is one of those things where the people who say or think they want to defund the police, guaranteed if someone's trying to steal their car or they're doing something else, who's the first person they're calling? They're going to be really upset when nobody's there to go hunt for their stolen items or car or who broke into their place, whatever, or anybody that tries to, murder them, stab them, whatever. They're going to be pretty upset when suddenly no one's coming to their rescue. And
yeah, you want that cop to be funded then, don't you?
Yeah, real quick, you want the money back, and you need them to get hired back mucho pronto. But yeah, this is. I just feel like every time you turn around, you look at some of these issues. Everything is just driven. There's just a wedge driven in everything, and there seems to be, well, in the media, at least, and in a lot of government agencies, there's just two extremes to these issues, but down the middle, there's an awful lot of folks who just say, can we just be common sense about this? And like you said, some common sense reformation here, something. But do we have to just eliminate it or go full send the other direction? Why can't we just be a little smarter about this?
Well, you're absolutely right. A lot of it is common sense, and a lot of it is hard work. I get the idea that people are resistant to change. Look, police officers, being humans, also are resistant to change. I do believe that reform in the long run will benefit cops. I believe that cops would benefit from reform to the way that we manage officers, greater transparency, more differentiated pay, right? Better pay for better performance, just like teachers. I think that cops and teachers would benefit from profound fundamental changes to the way that we manage at the agency level, or in the education space at the school level, right? Communities need more choice for their schools, public school versus private school, public sector police agencies versus being able to hire an agency on contract from the private sector. You need greater flexibility. And to your point, the business of policing will be better also when we get rid of this stupidly counterproductive idea of the war on drugs. It is something that most police officers will be able to tell you firsthand doesn't work. No matter, you don't have to be a libertarian, someone who's offended on an ethical level by the war on drugs as we are, to realize that as a practical matter, as a subjective matter, sure, but objectively speaking, the war on drugs has been a failure. It doesn't work. I would hate to be responsible for making the argument that it has gone well, right? And so I think a lot of Americans, not just police officers, are waking up to the idea that we need to treat medical problems for what they are, and criminalizing behavior. That's where black markets come from. Black markets are dangerous. Black markets kill people, and cops know this.
Absolutely. Well, Mr. Tremont, we've already got somebody asking. I knew this was going to come up early. So in the media, on both sides of the aisle, we have this thing with the border crisis. Some people consider it a border crisis, others don't. What is your take on all of this that's occurring with immigration, with open borders, and not just that? These cities that I think in Michigan somewhere, the governor's like, here's $500 if you let these people into your home, but then New York City's talking about passing out $10,000 a person. What is your take on all this stuff with immigration?
I think, well, first of all, there's a lot to unpack there, so let's take our time. I think that we need to start out by saying a couple of things that are true, and sometimes the basic principles get lost in the shuffle. So let me say out loud what might otherwise go unsaid, even if we're on the same page. Legal immigration is good for America. It is good for us culturally. It is good for us in the context of our entrepreneurial spirit. It is good for us economically. It is good for us even financially, even from the government's point of view, as long as you don't do something stupid like pass out free money. Now, if you're passing out free money, I can't help you. I mean, that is just so stupid. Whether you're passing it out to immigrants, you're passing it out to people who are born in the United States, you're passing it out to people who are outside the United States, you're passing it out to politicians, to contractors, to corporations, stop it, right? That is not per se an immigration policy problem, right? That is a problem with being stupid with money. The whole idea that, well, immigration is a problem because politicians pass out money. That is a problem. But the problem isn't the immigrant. The problem is the politician, right? We need to stop passing out free money. Now, the other thing that needs to be said is that illegal immigration, in my view, in several ways that we need to unpack, is bad for America. Illegal immigration is bad for America for a couple different reasons. Number one, and I've spent a couple of days down at the Arizona-Mexico border last year, and wow, it will break your heart, John. The humanitarian crisis that we have going on there from human trafficking is profound. Understand that most people who come into the United States come in illegally. And most people who come in illegally come in using some form of human trafficking. It's a gang on the Mexican side. It's a coyote. They're passed off to these people who use telephone-based apps on the U.S. side. And in far too many cases, end up in some form of indentured servitude. And in many of those cases, it is every bit as bad, every bit as much of a nightmare as you might imagine. We don't need to delve into that right now, but it is horrific. This is bad policy on any number of levels. When we create a black market, whether it's in drugs, right, or anything else. But when we create a black market in human trafficking, it's the worst. It's dangerous. It kills. It winds up in people dying at the border, indentured servitude. It has to be stopped. We need to get control over our border to discourage illegal immigration, because illegal immigration, first of all, is so bad for migrants, right? We need a policy that treats migrants with more dignity than to allow them to come in illegally. And then once they're in the United States, and by the way, whether you're in illegally or legally, we have a policy that says that you can't work right away. Holy cow, that's stupid. That is the backward policy of what I would suggest. I would be more comfortable with a policy that said, I'm going to call you in 6 weeks to make sure you have a job, right? Why are we recruiting people with the idea that they can't work? What are we doing? We're putting a sign out that says we want lazy people. Come in the United States, we'll give you free money and you're not allowed to work for some period of time. This is what depresses the wage rate for all Americans, is a black market in labor, whereby which in all too many cases, corporations, in many cases, very, very large corporations, in many cases in the ag sector, are able to take advantage of these people because they can't work legally, right? So you can pay them dirt cheap. This is what undermines the entire wage structure for everybody. So this is good for nobody. It's not good for immigrants. It's not good for America. It's not good for our economy. It's not good for us financially. And so this is why I say legal immigration is good for us. Illegal immigration is bad for us. So in my view, we need to get control of the border to stop illegal immigration and redeploy the resources necessary to vet people across the border faster. This whole idea that it should take weeks and months and years to decide whether someone is an acceptable risk is utter BS. We need to interface with other nations' databases so that we can tell whether or not you're on a list. If you're on a list, right? If you're wanted on a felony warrant out of your home nation, okay, that's something. I get that, right? We're going to screen you out. If you're on a terrorist watch list, and by the way, that's a whole nother can of worms that we need to talk about, is the crap that underlies the reasons why people get on that list that shouldn't be, but that's a different topic. If you're on a list and we know that you're someone that we don't want in the United States, then we should be screening you out. But if you're not on a list, the presumption should be that we want you in the United States. And I believe that legal immigration is good for us.
Yeah, because I know, again, this is one of those really hot issues where I guess the thing that I like to hear, well, the thing that I agree with most is an Ellis Island-based approach. You bring them in through one area, you vet them like you were talking about, and then the onus is kind of on them that, hey, you're going to have to support yourself. We can't be doling out.
Absolutely.
Our economy is in severe ruination right now. We can't be doling out money to people and supporting people who are just coming in and
to anybody.
Right, for God knows how long. So I like the thing I like is I like the Ellis Island approach. I'll be honest here. Something I'm not real thrilled about. I work with. There's 3 Filipino women at my job that are now legal U.S. citizens. Right? They went through the whole process. Now, I've been met with agreement and disagreement on this too, but 9.5 years seems a little ridiculous. I don't think you're incentivizing people to become legal U.S. citizens, become independent people who join the workforce or, create some product or whatever by making it take 9, 10, 11 years to become a legal U.S. citizen. I also find that
Insane.
a little insulting.
No, it's insane. It's insane. What is it? What is it is being considered here? It takes us 9.5 years to make up our mind, to go through the administration, to go through the court system. It's nothing but sheer silliness. We should be getting people in, vetted, and get them to work, get them integrated into the U.S. economy. This is good for us on a financial level as well as on a cultural level, and we need to stop shoving people into the shadows of our society.
Yeah, because when you talk about human trafficking, I mean, not, what you talked about, the sex trafficking, all these things. And it's like, it's horrible to think that they're doing this to kids and that there's a lot of people on both sides of that border that are making an awful lot of money off these young kids. That's disgusting. And those people, I don't know, I'm probably going to get a little dark here, but those people should be hunted down and something awful should be done to them. You don't do that.
Absolutely. And without the resources to do that, we need to, at the very least, deploy the resources necessary to get a hold of our border. Discouraging people to come in illegally is extremely important. And part of the way you do that is to stop this silly policy of making it so damn difficult to come through legally.
Right. Yeah, we need to, we need to stop incentivizing the welfare state and start incentivizing independent people who are actually coming here to leave an awful situation and to better themselves and,
of course.
And be productive members of society. That's the common sense thing in this.
Of course it is. And John, speaking of common sense, not that you and I have, embargoed common sense and we're the only ones that get it, but let's be honest. If you and I were on the Mexican side of the border this week, we would absolutely be doing everything we could to get in the United States. You and I would be doing everything we could to get our families across, right? I'd be tossing my kids over the wall and you'd be catching them. I'd be climbing up on your shoulders to get to the top of that wall and vice versa. We would be doing everything. We'd be swimming. We'd be cutting through barbed wire. We'd be climbing a wall. We'd be running through bushes in the dark. We would be doing it all. Because the truth is, the United States is a great place to raise a family and start a business. It's not what it used to be. I get that. It's not what it could be. That's what my campaign is all about. But if you have a choice between that and El Salvador, don't even talk to me about that. We are swimming the Rio Grande every day of the week and twice on Sunday, you and me together. And I got a problem with setting up a system, which our federal government has effectively done, which is to say, we recognize everyone's going to do it because they're not idiots, right? They're going to do it. We're not going to discourage them from doing it. We're not going to let them do it legally. And so they're going to come in the United States. They're going to be in a black market for labor. They're going to be running the risk of indentured servitude. And we're not going to do a damn thing about it. I've got an ethical problem with that.
Yes. So I know another thing that I've heard people hit on with this topic is a lot of military age males coming across, and that's freaking people out, rightfully so. I know a lot of them are Chinese and some other things. What are your thoughts on that? What do you think about maybe what's behind that?
I've got a problem with the rhetoric. And and that's not to say that I don't understand, right? This is why you want some vetting process at the border. But the truth of the matter is that we're going to have to get used to the idea that there are going to be a whole lot of young Chinese men wanting to come to the United States is potentially good for our economy. And the reason for this, of course, is because the Chinese government has perverted its demographic makeup so badly a generation ago until relatively recently. They have got literally millions too many men relative to how many women that they have there. There are demographic problems all over the world. There are public policy problems with authoritarianism, communism, with bad economic policy in our own hemisphere, right? You don't have to go any further than Venezuela to see an utter, absolute disaster. This is an opportunity for us. This is an opportunity for us to bring in the most entrepreneurial people, the most hardworking people in the world, are people who will do anything, hell or high water, to get into the United States.
All right, on to the next question. And I was going to talk to you about this, even I forgot to mention it before the show. What's your take on like a CBDC that the Federal Reserve seems hell-bent on implementing?
Yeah, we need to shut that down. The Fed says they're going to hold off until there's enabling federal legislation. And I worry that at some point the bureaucrats are going to be like, you know what? We're tired of waiting. We're going to let loose. Or worse, they will get the enabling legislation that they're waiting for. And I think that there are, two fundamental problems with this. One, we as libertarians talk about all the time, the forfeiture of our privacy, right? Once the Fed has its own blockchain-based technology and has its own digital currency out there, it will have access not just to metadata, but actual data on every transaction. They'll know, which microphone you bought and where you're getting your fancy blue t-shirts, and they'll know everything else about you. And nobody should be under the delusion that the Fed is going to be able to resist passing on that data to fill in the blank, the Department of Justice, the Treasury Department, or any other aspect of the government. And so your privacy is absolutely gone. But the other aspect of this that I think that we need to talk about as well is that the Fed is poised to really pervert the development of the smart economy. And the smart economy is the idea that a lot of our economy, transactions, contracts, supply chain linkages are going to be run based on blockchain technology. And we are going to need blockchain-based currency to go with that. We don't know all of the ways in which those sectors are going to develop, right? We don't know exactly yet what characteristics of those currencies are going to be most important. We don't know which currency is going to emerge, or currencies are going to emerge as the most useful. And we don't want the Fed biasing how those markets are going to develop. And I do believe that if the Fed issues its own currency, not only will it bias the market, but for all practical purposes, it could shut down the ability of Bitcoin, of Ethereum, to develop and play the roles that they very well might play in the smart economy. And the Fed would advantage to itself all of the regulatory structure, right? Cost structures. This is a real problem. And the perversion of how our economy develops would not only hold back the development and the growth of our economy, but could cede to other economies around the world an ability to control big pieces of our economy that we don't want other authoritarian regimes to control.
Yeah, that is my fear in all of this is the control that the Justice Department or any other bureaucracy could take over our lives just because every transaction you make, every single one is traceable and trackable. And then suddenly they don't like what you're buying, or they may not like what you're saying on the internet. Okay, well, we're just shutting your account off for a while. Now
Absolutely.
Good luck buying, going to the grocery store and getting your food because you've made someone angry at some bureaucratic level. And
you didn't get vaccinated, John, so we're going to make it more expensive for you to buy certain goods.
That part
that'll make your head explode.
Yes, that makes me want to have an involuntary personal protein spill on my shoes, if you will. So I want to get into this subject, but we've got another question from the live stream. Somebody wants to know, who are your kind of more libertarian inspirations, like who you listen to, read? Who are some of the people in the historical that kind of maybe brought you to the libertarian perspective?
Sure, I appreciate that. Look, I used to be a big Milton Friedman guy. I mean, I still am a big Milton Friedman guy. I miss the fact that the professor has passed away. I'm such a big Milton Friedman fan. I'm even a big Thomas Sowell fan. Let's put it that way. Just, an acolyte of Friedman. And it's one of the things that I appreciate so much about the Austrian school, the Hayeks of the world. When you really, in my view, one of the ways you judge the importance of a school of thought is its lineage, coming forward, its descendants. The fact that it had so much influence spawning the Chicago school, the fact that Hayek had influence over Friedman over Sowell, and Sowell over so much of what we understand today. That is really, so, and Hayek being influenced by von Mises, these, it's not so much that what von Mises had written itself was, in some sense, a lasting document that everyone reads every day today. That's not what it's really about. It is the fact that he broke new ground in those days and forced people to think differently so that succeeding generations would build on his shoulders, right? That Hayek would stand on his shoulders, that Friedman would stand on his shoulders, that Sowell would stand on his shoulders. That's what it's all about. And then, schmucks like me get to stand on Thomas Sowell's shoulders, right? And have a real view. And that's what it's really all about. It's not, one particular document 80 years ago. That's not what it is. It's about the acceleration it gives to the rest of us in succeeding generations. So, those guys have meant a great deal to me.
Yeah, Sowell is, especially Thomas Sowell to me, because not only economics, but also sociology. I mean, the guy studied cultures all around the world. He wrote so much on so many different things that it's, you sit there and you're like, how in the heck does one guy have enough brain power to sit here and delve into so much and then just put it right back to you? You ask him a question with just ease, and you're like,
absolutely. And he's a data-driven guy. He's not a guy that brings all kinds of weird biases to things, which of course is interesting because of his own, background. He grew up poor. He grew up in Harlem. He grew up, an African American. Obviously, he became a Marine. He was, by his own labeling, a socialist. Harvard. And so he brought all these pieces, right, and dropped it like a turd on Milton Friedman's desk, and the rest is history, of course.
So I've got what you brought up a few minutes ago when you said vaccine. I've got to ask your take, because this is one of these topics that is still highly important to me. There's something I don't want people to ever forget about, and that is what happened during COVID. We never want to see a repeat of what we went through with our vaccine passports, the mask mandates, all these different things. And even though they love to say they didn't force anybody to do anything, there was sure as hell an awful lot of coercion by corporations and government agencies. So what is your whole take? Well, I mean, spend as much time as you want on this whole COVID debacle that we had to live through.
There's a lot to unpack, isn't there? First of all, we are going to go through it again. And I think that that's something that folks like you and I got to get our brains around, is that we are going to go through it again. And that I believe that is true because there are two different lessons to learn. One is that a lot of statists, a lot of government politicians and bureaucrats and people who believe in big government, people who believe in good government, which is different than believing in correcting government. But people who believe in the power of the state and wielding it, I believe, learned an important lesson. and that is that you can make people do a lot of weird things. If you have the right messaging, if you don't worry too much about adhering to the truth, right? But if you have a lot of good messaging, you can get a hell of a lot of Americans to do a hell of a lot of things. You can get them to stay home. You can get them to stay away from work, from school. You can get them to wear masks. You can get them to take vaccines. You can get them to get their kids vaccines. You can make Americans do a lot of weird things. And then the second lesson is that there are government officials who will do that. And I think that the next time this happens, it's going to be worse because we have each, these two different groups, right? We have each learned this lesson. And the next conflict is going to be greater because you and I are going to be better prepared for it. And the statists are going to be better prepared for it. And they're going to double down. And so I worry, and I don't know whether it's going to be a disease. I tend to doubt it. Maybe it'll be environmental policy, right?
Yeah.
A foreign conflict, right? But it'll be something where the government comes for your civil liberties, and you and I are better prepared, and that conflict is therefore going to be twice as bad. And I worry about this a great deal. Remember that your government lied to you about, first of all, right from the get-go, about funding the science, right? They lied to you about how the virus was developed, how it escaped. The Chinese government lied to everybody. I guess that's no real big surprise to anybody. The U.S. government lied about the fact that the Chinese government lied about it. That's weird. First of all, that's just weird. That's an odd one. Like, why are you lying about that? Of all the things to lie about, I would have assumed that that's the one thing you want to go public with, right? But they lied to us about that. They decided you didn't need to know how it was developed. Then they lied to you about how much research was done. They lied to you about certain aspects of the research, deciding not to disclose certain things that were not covered by the research. They lied to you about mask efficacy in one direction. Then they lied to you about it in the other direction. That's a weird thing, by the way. And then they lied to you about what they knew about transmissibility and used it as an excuse to shut down big parts of the economy. A lot of that is just plain weird. In other words, I think it's hard to predict how it's going to play out next time, except for the fact that you can count on accelerating authoritarianism. And I believe that we have seen how authoritarianism grows in a democracy. We've seen from other democracies around the world, things that we never thought could happen in the United States. And it comes from a politician telling you what you really have to fear is not the loss of your civil liberties. What you really have to fear is that other idiot coming to power, right? And if you give me enough authority, enough power, I will protect you from him. And your life will be better. But you have to give me more power and more authority. That's what really matters. And that's where authoritarianism comes from. And it comes from these politicians giving up on what had been their political agenda. And now their political agenda, you look at either side of the duopoly, you have to admit that the number one policy of the Democratic Party is to keep Republicans out of power and vice versa, right? And that's different than, when I was growing up, kids out there, ask your parents, you could find Republicans who would talk about being fiscally conservative and free markets and, free trade and pro-growth. Not so much anymore. It's really about trying to embarrass Democrats and trying to keep them out of power, right? And when I was a kid, you could find a Democrat sticking up for your First Amendment rights, social liberalism, not beating people into all thinking the same thing the way they do now, or controlling Facebook and Twitter and all this dopey stuff, right? I'll tell you something. This is weird. This is for the youngsters in your audience. When I was growing up, you could find a Democrat who would not only stand up for your First Amendment rights, but would stand up for your Second Amendment rights. How's that for weird?
Very weird. Extremely weird.
Extremely weird. And so what I fear is a growing sense of authoritarianism coming out of the COVID regime that will be met with greater pushback, thank God, but could lead to a whole lot of conflict on an order of magnitude that we haven't seen yet.
And you bring up something when you're talking about this coming full circle again. When you talk about the climate, I know there's been talk where, they've discussed, they'll just declare a climate emergency, and then you'll have to shelter in place. You'll have to stay in your home. So what is your take on what either climate change or global warming or whatever the flavor of the day is, whatever
right.
Weird word screw vocabulary they want to throw at you? What is
right?
What is your thought? What are your thoughts on this whole thing? Because it's absolutely baffling to listen to these people talk at times.
Well, you cannot trust them. They cannot. They have no interest in trusting you. Right? That's proven. So why should you trust them? This is the political class, elected officials and unaccountable bureaucrats. These are people who don't give a damn about your values. I mean, they really don't. The reason they operate in the shadows is because they don't operate in your interest. So they have to hide half the time what it is that they're doing. And you know that because the stupid stuff they do is not stuff you would do. Right? You would not blow up a pipeline in the bottom of the Baltic Sea just because you were mad at the relationship between the Russians and the Germans. That is not something you would do. So you know that these people are operating with a different value system than yours. Look, regarding the environment, not only do I not know exactly the mechanisms or the extent to which various mechanisms are driving climate change, but it's important, I believe, as a matter of public policy, for us to leave the science in the private sector. I'm a big believer that we need to separate science and government, the same way we separate religion and government. In other words, we cannot be anti-vaccine mandate because we hate the vaccines themselves. Even if the vaccines were perfect, you've got to hate the vaccine mandates anyway. You get my point?
Yes.
Even if there were a perfect vaccine, the government doesn't have the authority to tell you to take it. And so as a matter of public policy, it is not dependent on how you feel about the science of climate change. No matter the science of climate change, the government does not have the moral authority to tell you what to do with your assets. This is absolutely critical. Now, as an objective matter, never mind the ethics of it, as an objective matter, let's suppose that there is a tremendous climate change coming. I don't know that that's true, but let's suppose that it is true for a moment, right? And let's suppose that to deal with that, humanity is going to have to make some serious changes. And that we're going to have to deploy an enormous amount of resources to deal with fill in the blank. More sunshine in some areas, more heat in some areas, higher water levels in some areas. Let's imagine this is going to be a serious deal, right? Who do you want to be in charge of deploying those resources? This should not be a hard question. If you vote for the federal government of the United States, my goodness, I cannot help you. Or choice B, do you want a market system to decide how to deploy those resources? You get where I'm going.
Right. That's a pretty common sense question. It should be a common sense answer. When you look at the Affordable Health or the Affordable Care Act, all these things, the war on drugs, the war on poverty, the war on illiteracy, everything that the government has declared war on has gotten worse. It never gets better. So why would I want these people fighting in my name to battle climate change? Because even if climate change was as realistic as they say, that means they're going to make it worse and not better.
Absolutely. They're gonna hold back our economy so we don't have the growth necessary to muster the resources we need. who do you want deciding on a seawall in Miami? You want some schmuck in Washington making that call? Holy cow. The answer is no, right? I mean, if the conversation starts out with, okay, we got this water table problem and we need a seawall. If the word Washington is mentioned, you've gone off the rails. Okay. At any point, if the word Washington is mentioned, just stop right there. Just go back and start over again.
Yeah, it's time to go take your medication because clearly it's worn off. You're not
right.
You're not thinking clearly. And that's when you watch, and that's one other thing. When you watch the people, I think this is the most hypocritical thing. We have people boarding their private planes, flying across an ocean to tell me I should watch how much electricity I use, to watch my carbon footprint. Like, dude, you had like 4 people on a plane flying across the ocean, and that's right. Irrelevant to this?
That's like my carbon footprint for 2023 right there, was that trip to Paris, right? And it's so dopey, but it just goes to the fact that they live by call it a code of ethics or a set of principles or a value system that just does not align with yours. These people, they don't care about your values. They don't understand your values. They don't understand to figure out your values. They just don't care. They live by a different, set of principles. And this is why it's so important. I believe it's so important for libertarians to stand up to the government, to the state, to this growing sense of authoritarianism. I mean, John, if we're waiting, let me say something stupid. If we're waiting for a Republican to lead the charge back toward a constitution of the limited powers, holy cow, we're waiting for something that ain't going to happen, right? If you're waiting for a Democrat to lead that charge,
face palm.
Yeah, I just don't see that. And that's why I view 2024 is not just an opportunity for third-party candidates, generally, libertarians particularly, but I see it as an obligation. It's a call of duty. If you care about America, if you care about your neighbors, right, pick up a shovel. I mean, we've got to get no one else is going to do this for us. That's clear. The system has been in place for, a couple of hundred years now. It's looked pretty much the same for 100 years and is accelerating in a bad direction. You cannot just sit by and watch and say, I hope that all of a sudden a bunch of politicians get together and do what? Reverse our foreign policy of strategic intervention and the projection of military hegemony around the world and using your money to do it and forfeiting foreign aid in the stupid hope that we buy influence from people and fight proxy wars against fill in the blank, Russia, Iran, next is China. I'm sorry. What makes you think that all of a sudden these people are going to reverse course in foreign policy? What makes you think that all of a sudden these people are going to reverse course in terms of how much money they spend, right? The only thing that's going to make them stop spending money is if the federal government of the United States fails to meet its debt obligations and crashes and burns all of a sudden. They'll keep going until that happens.
Yeah, and that's the most frightening part is you get a couple people. You have your Thomas Masseys or your Rand Pauls getting up there and sounding the alarm. It falls on deaf ears, and what do? Like I think it was Rand Paul says, hey, Republicans, when the Democrats are in office, you're complaining about their spending. But when you get into office and you have control, you spend money like it's going out of style. You act just like the other side of the aisle does. And they just sit there like, yeah, pretty much. And then, Thomas Massey's got his little thing that
shut up, Rand. Leave us alone.
With the national debt. And he's literally stated, these guys that's sitting close to him will go ahead and vote yes on some horrible spending bill, but nervously doing it to see if the number on his lapel pin suddenly surges up. So even though he's making them nervous by like, am I the cause of this?
Yeah,
These
apparently
people
not
are
nervous enough, huh?
right. They're still voting yes. So it's like, well, that's not working either. But yeah, this, I think I've heard it before. This, we can't expect white knights to come riding in and just suddenly reversing course, and common sense and logic and liberty prevails in Washington, D.C. That's a naive way of thinking. Those people have been at it for a long time, and they're not going to quit until they've just ran this thing right off the cliff to the depths below without a care in the world.
And, it's not so much that the failure and the disintegration, the collapse and the disappearance of the federal government of the United States bothers me per se. I don't think most of us will miss it. It's not like it's been adding so much value to our lives, right? It really, the one thing that we want it to do, like take care of our border and protect our civil liberties, are, the two things at which it's worst of all the things that it does. What bothers me though, is that when it fails to meet its debt obligations, what I worry about is that the US dollar would collapse at the same time. And the problem with that is not so much that I'm wed to the idea that the US dollar is the greatest thing since sliced bread, but it is at the moment, and for the foreseeable future, the only international reserve currency. Whatever is in second place is a distant second, right? The euro and the British pound and, the renminbi. And all these things are so far behind that if the dollar were to collapse, it would plunge us into a worldwide depression that would be extremely difficult to climb out of. It would take decades to climb out of a depression like that without a working reserve currency. Holy cow. And so I worry that a depression like that sets us back not just years, but generations. And for what? Because the federal government of the United States was too stupid to correct course. It's just terrible. I wish that the one reserve currency in the world were not controlled by a government. And parenthetically, if it's going to be controlled by a government, I wish it weren't by a government as stupid as this one. But having said that, it is. And I don't like the idea that everyone around the globe has to pay a price through an economic depression just because the federal government of the United States couldn't stick to its knitting.
Yeah, it is. I wish more people really understood the foundation of what the Federal Reserve Bank is, and understand even how it it controls our government. When the President of the United States is going to pick the chairman of the Fed, the Federal Reserve hands him a list of 12 people and says, here's who you can pick from. They don't even have the choice to pick their own head of the Fed, chairman of the Fed. The list is given to them. That should tell everybody what they need to know.
Because they fear the actions of the Fed will hurt them politically.
Yeah.
The Fed is an extraordinarily politically powerful organization, and we need to pare it back. But that means that we need cojones in the White House, and we haven't had that in generations.
Absolutely. Well, Mr. Tamat, we're almost at 52 minutes. So I know we said we do 56. So would you like to leave us with some parting words? Also give a plug for your site and anything else before we go.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. It's a great joy to be with you, by the way. I wish I were in Missouri with you right now. I grew up outside of Chicago, so I know where you are, and I know the weather that that you've been weathering through the winter, right? Look, if anyone wants to learn more about our campaign, you put your finger on it. I am campaigning for the nomination of the Libertarian Party for President of the United States. I do believe it is, of course, likely that I will secure that nomination. It is not in the bag. So if you'd like to help out, reach out through the website. If you got, if you got $50 that is really annoying you and you got to get rid of it, there's a way to do that on the website. But just as more importantly, my contact information is there. Drop me a buzz, give me a text, give me an email. Let me know what you think. If I said something that drives you crazy, let me know. And if you want to participate with the campaign, let me know. You can go to MikeTermott.com. That's kind of hard because there's 2 A's in Termott, so that might be kind of hard to spell. You can go to MikeTermott.com, but easier to spell, you can go to goldnewdeal.com. goldnewdeal.org. You can go to goldnewdeal.org and you'll see our platform. Our platform has its own URL. Our platform has its own website, which is kind of weird, I suppose, but we're having fun with it. Obviously, we're making a little bit of fun of FDR's New Deal. We believe that we need a very fundamentally a very different relationship between us and the government. We believe that we need to roll back all of the New Deal crap. We're also making fun a little bit of AOC's Green New Deal, right? Calling it a gold New Deal. Gold is the color of the Libertarian Party. We're not, shy about saying we need to replace the Federal Reserve System, that we need to harden our currency, that we need to get rid of this silly idea of a discretionary policy toward our monetary policy, toward the control of our dollar, toward interest rates, that we need a rules-based system. That doesn't necessarily mean you have to go all the way back to the gold standard, but it does mean you can't have this stupid policy where, I think most of your listeners know the way it works now is you lock up a dozen people in a room every 6 weeks and ask them basically what mood they're in. That's how we set interest rates in the United States. That's weird. I think if most Americans understood that, they'd be like, no, you're BSing us, right? No. That's how it works. That's literally how it works. The most important price in the world ever is set by locking people up in a room every 6 weeks and giving them complete discretion. Wow. And now I'm not trying to say that they're idiots. I mean, they're 12 decent people, but I'm not sure you would do any worse if you threw 12 baseballs out of a 6th floor window in Washington, D.C., and whoever you bumped into, you could lock them up in a room too. So we need to replace that with a hard rules-based system to harden our currency. And you'll see a lot of other really transformational ideas on goldnewdeal.org. You can read about our campaign. We got a very professional campaign. We're planning on launching a very competitive, a very credibly competitive campaign on the other side of the nomination process once we get into the general election. We're in it to win it. We are going to disrupt the duopoly. We're going to force the duopoly legacy parties to take into consideration our values, our principles, the way that we see the world, take into consideration our party, and no longer allow them to just disregard us willy-nilly. That's what it's all about.
Well, thank you so much for your time, Mr. Maat. Love talking to you. Maybe talk to you again in the not-too-distant future.
I hope so. I look forward to that. Thanks, John. It's been a great pleasure to be with you.
Take care, Mike.
Take care. I'll talk to you later.
All right. Okay. So that was Mr. Maat. Let me pull that off. All right. Cool. So that was a fast 56 minutes. And wow. I didn't expect to go quite that fast. But hey, that worked out for me, and he got right up to the 56-minute mark and cut it off just in time. So, with that being said, folks, that's going to do it for this week's edition of the Missouri Liberty Report. I thank you all so much for joining me again. Next week, as you know, I will be joined by Dr. Michael Rechtenwald, and man, oh man, super psyched for that one. So that one will be at least an hour and a half. He's promised me an hour and a half. And so we're going to be, I'm really looking forward to that one. But also on Thursday, grandbaby Oakley should be here sometime. I would say, 8:30, 9:30 in the morning. The new grandbaby should be here. And so Friday night, you're probably going to have to hold me down in my chair. Between the interview and a new grandkid, you're probably going to have to keep me from floating up. But I will do my best. All right, folks. Well, we'll see y'all next Friday here. Hope y'all have a great weekend and, a great rest of your Friday evening. And I look forward to seeing you next week, guys. Take care.